I wanted to take a look at a few openings today, and then I also wanted to take a look at a few games as well. So what I really wanted to look at was the Ready opening. I don't think we've done this before on the stream, so I wanted to take a look and sort of see, the main opening book lines. I wanted to see take this from Black's perspective, and what should you do if you play Knight F3, or if White plays Knight F3. Basically, it's an interesting opening. I mean, it can be used for a lot of different types of transpositional concepts. Like, if White plays Knight F3, you can White has the option to transpose it into a D pawn or C pawn opening at a favorable point. It can often provide an opportunity for a higher rated player against a lower rated player, and basically a way for someone who's likely to see their opponent misstep positionally. A way to basically exploit this by playing for an error. Basically in the Ready, it's an opening that can transpose very easily. So knowing when to transpose and when not to transpose is something that a highly rated player tends to be able to know. And when playing it against a lower rated player, they will play for that transposition at the optimum time. What are the most common responses to Knight F3? Basically anything. There's a bunch of different options. They all play out slightly differently. The first four are Knight F6, D5, C5, and G6. And basically, these sort of play out similarly to Queen's Pawn openings. D5 makes the earliest attempt to transpose it into a Queen Pawn opening. White can play C4 against that. And G6, Knight F6, and C5 all basically make attempts to transform it into a Queen Pawn opening. C5 probably the least transparently so, but it generally tends to end up in Queen's Pawn type positions. So let's look. Knight F6, and actually, but let's start off actually with the D5 pawn opening. What's interesting here is basically you can transpose it directly as White into a Queen Pawn opening with D4. G3 is also played here, but the number 3 option here is C4. What's interesting about C4 is basically, C4 is not committal in terms of, transposing this into a Queen's Pawn opening. It is the move that, with D4 will make it a Queen's Pawn game, a Queen's Gambit type position. But it's not directly it's not directly a Queen's Pawn game if C4 is played. Let's take a look at these C4 options. On C4, Black's best option is probably just to play something that looks like a Queen's Pawn game type position. C6 is good, E6 is good, D4 is interesting, probably not as good, but basically those are the options. If Black can turn it into a Slav position with C6, that tends to be good for Black. On D4, Black can play Knight F6, and basically this will put a threat on C4, and align these knights, and now it's transposed pretty safely into a Slav opening. Going back, there's a number of options. So say C5, E4. Now you're in basically a Sicilian position with Knight C6, D6, or E6. You transpose it into a Sicilian. I guess I'm sort of looking for positions that are like, very ready characteristic, as opposed to a transposition. D4, Knight F6, C4, and you're in the King's Indian defense. D4 and you're in a modern. E4, and I guess you're in, this is probably the purest ready there is. Here you basically, are not going to see E5 from Black. You're probably going to see bishop to G7 or C5, but there's a good chance that this transposes from the ready into the Sicilian. Hey, welcome, Aphelion. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, so options here for Black, include C5, include bishop G7, but both of those kind of cleanly transpose. C5, it turns from a ready into Sicilian. Bishop G7, it's still a ready. I guess we could go with kind of a straightforward ready lines, and with D6 should turn into a modern, I think. Certainly modern after D4. C4, still the ready, but the odds of it transposing from the ready into a more modern type position are pretty high. I'd play C4, D4, C takes, Knight C6, Knight C3, Bishop G7, and basically you're in the Sicilian. I don't know. I guess I want to look most at the positions that are clearly defined as ready, and those I guess are probably the ones that come along with c4 the most frequently. c3 is Sicilian. e4, c5 basically transposes into some form of the Sicilian. Bishop g7, you're still in the ready. c4, you're still in the ready. c5. But, it really just transfers into the Sicilian at some point. I'm looking for very pure ready theory. If you play something, I guess, that deviates from the book here, it will become the ready, but this transposes into the English. So, anyways, I guess the main point here is what should Black do to what makes the ready, and it's probably its flexibility. Like, you're going to end up in some type of position. So the goal of the ready is basically using its transpositional ability as white to transpose it into a familiar opening at a favorable point. Ideas here probably include, like, I don't know, with bishop g7, bishop c4, c5, c3. Or alternatively, if you see bishop to c4 here, you can play an early c5 as black to try to transpose it into a Sicilian that's favorable. This is the Sicilian. So if you play knight c6 here, you then have a Sicilian position where this bishop is going to be kind of on a suboptimal line. All the fundamentals always stay true. Yeah, that's pretty much true, Aphelion. If you go into really weird sidelines, sometimes you can keep the ready opening designation for the rest of the game. But yeah, it's basically a transpositional tool, and the higher rated player, the player that has more familiarity with structures and general opening concepts, can probably know how to transpose and which transpositions put them in a better position. I've seen grandmasters play it as a general strategy. I think that's pretty cool. Like, if grandmasters are playing, like, expert level players, they do play stuff like the ready because, they have a better understanding of, like, the positional concepts and the ideas in various openings. So they know which pawn structures to shoot for and when to use, the transposition of the ready into, to their advantage, basically. Basically calling for the correct time for the transposition. Castles, e6, rook e1, knight e7, d4. And basically here, this one, for example, has never really transposed. This is still some type of ready position, some type of ready / Sicilian similarity. But it's an interesting question. The main point is to try to capture, both capture a situation in which you can make a favorable transposition. So, like, if you see an early bishop c4, you can play c5, knowing that the bishop on c4 is usually misplaced in a Sicilian opening. That would be a kind of a favorable play for black. I'm trying to think of other examples, but, like, if there's e4, I don't know, knight c3, bishop g7, knight c3, e6, I don't know. I mean, basically, this, with this transposition, pretty much everything is good for black, right? The light squared bishop in this case has no real good line for development now. d4, d5 will transpose this into a pretty favorable French, I think. I'm kind of curious about the eval for this. Basically, black will have the opportunity to play knight d7 and c5, and it's sort of a general transposition here that I think is pretty solid. Bishop b6, bishop b7, knight e7. All of this I think is pretty good for black, and in terms of playing a straightforward response to the ready, I think there's not really a good way to do that. What I instead recommend is reading a book like Ideas Behind the Chess Openings, or chess structures. Where you basically understand the opening, the opening concepts and the pawn structures in each opening, so that how to capitalize on the ready's transpositional ability. The simplest thing that I can think of is just this, this bishop c4. If you play c5, it turns into a misplaced Sicilian. There's probably others here. D4, bishop g7. I don't know, e4, c5. This basically turns into a aggressive, aggressive dragon. Um, uh, I don't know. This will generally play out pretty well for black. Aggressive, double-edged opening. But the main point of the ready is just to capture the correct transposition. You want to try to make non-committal moves, but still, not generate any weaknesses for yourself. Good non-committal moves to play in the ready are things like knight f6. That's pretty safe. With knight f6, you're likely to transpose it into a d4 or c4 type move. With g6, bishop g7, there's many openings that have that basic structure. So it's sort of hard to go wrong in the ready with these types of transpositional moves. G6, c4, bishop d5, bishop g7. Overall, I think black's looking pretty solid. Nothing extremely surprising or difficult to face here. C takes, knight takes, e4, knight b6. I don't know, a4, bishop g7. But overall, I like black's position. I think black's playing pretty well here, and it hasn't transposed into anything particularly favorable for white. Ideas could include c5. Ideas could include knight c6, but nothing particularly frightening, to be honest. Anyways, tough situations. It's hard to know, exactly when you can and can't transpose into something without a good understanding of positional play. But yeah, I would go with d4 and g6, and I don't know, bishop g7. Overall, I like black's position here, and I think that black will hold it together pretty well. Playing the Grunfeld or King's Indian. If you just turn it into a King's Indian here, this can't really be too terrible for black. It'll basically transpose into mainline opening theory. But yeah, it's really up to you. This opening plays for good opening understanding, and the ability to play c4, d4, e4 at the correct times. It's a transpositional tool, basically, and like most transpositional tools, you're hoping to trip up your opponent on the move order. But it's an interesting opening, good to know at least. Now I guess I want to take a look at the King's Gambit. So the King's Gambit is not refuted. It's one of those openings that I'm pretty sure is, on the edge of refutation. It's interesting. It's sort of fallen out of favor. But there's basically a few main lines here after there's a few main lines. So bishop c4, queen h4 is the main line. That's the bishop's gambit. Knight f3 is the other main line. On knight f3, there's actually a fair number of playable moves for black. These moves include g5, they include d5, they include d6, bishop e7, and knight f6. Basically, all of these are relatively good for black, and I think it depends on what you want to play. The most common move here, g5, is very aggressive. G5 is basically what white is hoping for in the King's Gambit. Most of the white lines are designed out of the immediate g5, and this is a way to play it. I don't know, in terms of from an eval perspective, it seems like a choice between g5 and d5. But g5 is what white wants. So it's even if it is objectively the best, it creates the most dangerous positions for black because with these dangerous positions, there's a good chance that black is going to have to withstand an attack. With something like d5 immediately, it's not really quite as clear. D5, e takes d5, and then either knight f6 is probably the most common. Bishop d6 is also very playable. Black's probably going to get, black has given back material here, but overall, I think, from a playing perspective, opening these lines for black and not overextending or destroying your kingside pawn structure probably makes you as safe as you can be in the King's Gambit. There's a few other extreme ones where I can go through. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Museo opening. But this is an extremely aggressive sacrifice for white. I think it's refuted. I think the lines are queen f6 or queen. I think queen f6 is basically the refuting line. But this stuff's really dangerous. I don't know. It looks like black is up for black is up a pawn or so, and that's pretty. That's generally pretty dangerous. Queen f6, is up a pawn, but in order for this to be a playable opening line, black is going to have to take that pawn and run it against white's practical compensation here. So queen f6, here d3, bishop c5, king h1, and overall I don't think there's, I think by playing queen f6 against the Museo, black has successfully slowed this game down a lot. This overall looks good. I think d3 is an idea, but I don't know. I guess, white has a number of options to try to, extend this attack. e5 is one. On e5, you just go for kind of quick development as white. White has a big lead in development and pressure on the f5 pawn. But yeah, I guess, I would say that white's down a pawn and doesn't really have that much to show for it in this situation. So overall, knight f3, knight f6, d4, c4, and this. Sorry, I jumped from the ready to the King's Gambit. E takes f4. Knight f3 is the main line. On bishop to h4, the main line is queen h4, if I'm not mistaken. Queen h4 is the line that I learned is the main line. I guess on bishop to c4, you can also play d5. You can also play knight f6. But the straightforward bishop's opening, I remember as being queen h4, king f1, and the rook development for white is kind of a problem. In the rest of this game, black plays d6. White plays knight f3, queen h5, and then bishop to g5, bishop to g4 is coming, focused on queen d1. But I like this situation. You're exerting a lot of pressure on white. You play bishop to g4, you play knight c6, knight e5, and white's situation is good. I mean, black's situation is good. White hasn't really shown much of a development, and from a practical compensation standpoint, black is now the attacker in this position. So, basically, black's, I think, comfortably winning after this. d6 is the mainline move, knight f3. Queen f6 is actually what's recommended. I've actually seen this as, I've always played this as queen to h5. I'm sort of interested in looking at the queen f6 line now, though. Here, we can flip it to black's perspective. But f4, pawn takes, bishop c4, queen h4, king f1, and d6 here is the main line, and knight f3. And I had always played queen to h5, but that may not be the most or the best move here. From an eval perspective, it looks like there's a half pawn difference favoring queen to f6, which was the refutation of the Museo. That's interesting. d4, bishop to e7. I guess I'm interested in queen f6 as a possibility here. I mean, it's kind of a rarely played opening. I mean, how often is your opponent playing the King's Gambit bishop c4? But I'm seeing here that the queen f6 seems to be a better resource for black than I had thought that it was. In times when I played this in the past. Interesting. We can go through a queen h5 line, just to show sort of what I'm used to seeing. But I'm used to like this type of thing. Guess maybe this isn't as good for black. Yeah, this leads to about equality. But black was winning, so maybe equality is not really that great. I think queen f6 is the better move for black here. Now seeing that's the main line and looking at the eval. d4, bishop g4, knight c3. I sort of like the way that black is playing this now. c6. Black is basically going to get good development with bishop e7, knight d7, knight h6. And I think pretty much things are going to go. Yeah, I mean, I think things are going to go pretty straightforwardly good for black here. Knight d7, knight b6, bishop e7. White hasn't been able to really, prove the value of his gambit. It looks like, if anything, this king is bad on f1, and black is going to catch up quickly to white in development. White has a better pawn center, but that's not really worth that much. The king's going to castle queenside pretty quickly, so not really much of an opportunity to cement an advantage here. Interesting. So f4, pawn takes f4, f4, pawn takes f4, knight f3, and basically, what should black play here? An opportunity is g5, an opportunity is d5, an opportunity is d6. But let's look, I guess, at, I don't know. I mean, the g5 lines seem dangerous. I guess I would just say, g5 may be the most aggressive way to play for black, but d5 is much more effective at kind of diffusing the situation. This is the modern defense, is what it's called, King's Gambit accepted modern defense. Pawn takes d5, knight f6, bishop c4, knight takes, castles, and there's a number of different transpositions here. But the main point is that it's sort of translated into more of a chess game and less of a gambit. You're kind of sidestepping book theory here. It makes things a lot less dangerous for black. If you just generally play d5 in the King's Gambit, you're opening up positions for yourself, and the material that you're potentially giving up there is worth the it's worth basically the recovery of some control in the position. It's dangerous to play the g5 lines. We can look at some g5 lines, but the main point of this King's Gambit lecture is, I would say, be quick to play d5. d5 is very rarely a bad move in the King's Gambit, and it will turn it from a gambit where you may be at a great disadvantage in terms of knowing the theory. It'll turn it from a King's Gambit to a playable chess game, and that's really the goal. I mean, strategically speaking, I think it's always good to just be comfortable that you can play chess in a random but normal position better than your opponent. I mean, if you can basically turn the game into something where it's about positional value and tactics. I think that in the big picture strategy, that's what you would like to do. So, pawn takes d5, knight f6, bishop c4, knight takes, castles, bishop e7. Basically, black's looking fine. In terms of material, black is still up a pawn. The d5 pawn got taken, but the e4 pawn that took on d5 also got taken, so you're still basically up one pawn as a gambit here, this pawn on f4. But yeah, I think overall this is a pretty solid position. Knight c3 is an idea, castles is an idea, knight c3 followed by castles would be a play for black. But multiple options available to white. d4 is one, knight c3 is another. And with d4, castles, bishop takes, queen takes, bishop takes. This basically ends up being pretty good for black. It's a complicated position where white doesn't have a huge advantage. You can do things like play queen e4, you can play knight c6, you can play bishop to g4, and overall I think it's a good position. You're doing just fine. It's a chess game that has benefits for both sides, and I think black stands pretty well here. This d4 pawn is somewhat vulnerable. Black can play c5 and knight c6, and black can play bishop e6. So overall, good good playing for black. Good way to diffuse the gambit, and the evals leaning the evals is listing exactly as a quality here. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the King's Gambit, I don't know. What I do is I accept the gambit and then play quick d5. We can go through a quick g5 line, but again, I'm not really that great with these. They get very dangerous. Ideas for white here, knight c3 is playable, bishop c4 is playable, like in the Museo. Let's play h4. H4 is one of the lines that has a lot more theory involved in it. Knight e5, knight f6, bishop c4, d5, pawn takes, bishop d6. And basically here, you're in kind of an aggressive position. This is still probably good for black from an objective standpoint. It looks like white needs to play d4 here to defend the knight, and the knight can't play to d3. So it's the follow-up move here is d4. But overall here, it's a very complicated position. There's a lot of ways that black can misstep here. And it's really the sort of position that white was playing for. I mean, basically in these classical games, white is playing for these crazy, these crazy attacks. And with these attacks come double-edged positions. In this position, what do you do as black? I mean, the most intuitive things are probably to play bishop f5, play the knight on the b file to d7. But basically here, I think that different ideas for black end up being relatively good. Black is better. Many plans are good, but he will have to be careful and not make any tactical errors. Knight h5, knight c3, queen e7, bishop b5, c6. Yeah, this looks, this basically looks good for black in my perspective. But this is the main line, which is a pawn and a half up or something. I don't know. It's good for black, but extremely dangerous. It's what white wants in this situation. So anyways, that leads me to believe that you probably shouldn't play g5. It's just too double-edged, and unless you are a King's Gambit player or have spent a lot of time learning the King's Gambit as white, it's difficult to navigate all those middle game complexities as black. They're not that intuitive. A lot of them are really trappy. So I think you can basically play pawn takes c4, knight f3, and then d5. And basically this will end up being good. This will be good for black. You're turning it more into a chess game and less into pre-designated, pre-designed theory. And that should be good. The goal of learning from this proposing, basically, a better overall chess player from a strategic and tactical standpoint, and beating your in equal positions, or equal positions or positions. People are out of theory. That I think is the best idea. Yeah, I guess I would say good stuff. D5 though, pawn takes f4 and d5. Yeah, this camera is a little bit interesting. It goes on and off, but yeah, I think that opening is good. But yeah, Felion, yeah, I'm still working on this camera. It's USB connected, and sometimes the USB gets sort of jostled. Okay, cool. So this game, basically, we're taking this game from white's perspective, Suban Budo. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at this position. It's queen's pawn opening. White plays the London system. London system is good and solid, and I think a strong idea for white generally. This all is very solid. White's going to have a small positional advantage that he's going to be able to take for quite a while. Bishop takes, and e5 looks like a pretty serious error. I think all of this looks fine for white. In terms of opening moves, let's just go through this. Knight c6 is a little questionable in my mind. I mean, I don't like knight c6 because it blocks the c-pawn, but it is played in the London more frequent. It is played in the London. Sometimes, still kind of offbeat, but it's played in the London more frequently. Knight f3 is the most common move here. Black plays knight f6. e3 is the most common move. Bishop g4, and bishop e2 makes complete sense. So all of this stuff, ends up being pretty solidly played for white. In terms of things that black can do here, I think both sides are just at a position where they're both going to do the best by making normal developing moves. Black should probably play e6, maybe move the bishop to h5, but probably playing it unprompted is not a good reason, so I'd probably play e6 and bishop to d6 here. It's a London game. Both sides have normal, healthy development. And the goal here basically is to try to outmaneuver your opponent in a position where you have some positional, you basically have good positional components and bad, and relatively bad chances of getting an unsound attack. So bishop takes, and then e5 is a pretty serious blunder. With e5, this is a move that black should, black gives a big advantage to white by playing. Pawn takes e5, and the knight doesn't really have a great square to go to. Best, I'm sure, is knight d7. Getting this pawn off or making attempts to try to trade this pawn off is good. But on knight d7, bishop takes d5, so actually, I'm not completely sure. e5 is a serious blunder. There wasn't really much reason to play e5, and with e5 having been played, d takes e5, and things are looking very good for white. Here you can take the knight with the bishop, and here we're back to an equal position. Okay, so given that we're in an equal position, let's come up with some strategies for each side. White, the first move is white can take d5. I think white probably should take d5, but that's a tactical play and not really big strategy. On queen takes d5, bishop takes e3, and white basically has an extended pawn on e5. So let's say this, for example, queen takes d5, bishop takes e3, or queen takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes e3. And it's sort of tricky. I mean, these doubled isolated pawns are pretty bad. Maybe it's better to play knight takes e5 here, but it's hard to feel like, and I see that eval is favoring black, but I still sort of like white's position after bishop takes b7. Bishop takes b7, rook b8, bishop d5. Rook can't take b2. If rook plays to d, or if rook takes b2, then bishop plays to b3 and traps the rook in. So here, white's up a pawn, or white's up 2 pawns, and the position's equal. Black's chances are probably best with bishop takes e3. That makes it 1 pawn again, but it's an interesting situation. Evaluated as completely equal here. I sort of want to take a look at why this is completely equal. It's interesting. Basically, black has a fractured pawn structure. White has a solid pawn structure, 2 pawn islands, but these pawns are, not as strong as these 3. So ideas for white could include rook to f1, rook takes b2, bishop b3, knight c3. And overall, I think white's just going to go about playing relatively normal moves, and there's not really going to be any issues here. I guess I would play rook f1, but I don't know. Knight c3 is also a straightforward developing move. White's king safety might become kind of a liability. A rook could get over to e8, a rook could get over to d8, and with the fact that this king can't castle either queenside or kingside with the bishop on e3, king safety is going to be a problem. That's probably black's best. If I was to come up with a strategy in this position, I would try to play like rook e8 or rook d8, and then and then basically get it so that that this king was stuck on the middle and the black pieces were attacking him. But overall, I think I think it's, I don't know, I would say an interesting position. Pawn takes e5 is a big mistake. Knight h5 is a big mistake. And here we're again close to equality. This is the position I want to focus on. We'll see a lot of tactics later in the game, and the thing about tactics is, I think the engine can solve them better than I can, so I don't want to spend a lot of time going over them. But if you were playing this position, how would you best capitalize? The queen to g5, followed by queen e2 maybe. It's white to move, so knight c3 is an idea. Engine is evaluating knight c3 as the best. That's interesting. I would figure queen takes d5, getting the immediate material advantage is better, but I don't know. White's going to have developmental problems here. I think maybe castles is good. Basically, if this bishop takes on e3, white's king safety is going to be compromised for the rest of the game. Either castles kingside or castles queenside are both difficult for white there. So I would guess, I don't know. Queen takes d5. It looks good to me, but it may allow bishop takes e3 too easily. Queen d2 I sort of makes sense in my, queen d2 makes sense to me. Uh, Queen g5 is the responding tactic. Let's look at this computer line here. Queen g5, and I guess yeah, I guess Queen d2 doesn't really improve your ability to castle safely. That's big. So Queen takes d5 is probably best. Queen takes d5, Knight c3, and then castles either kingside or queenside here. That's probably the best continuation. I would just take, and then take, and then take, and then basically, the knight. I think the engine's evaluating knight takes e5 as being better than bishop takes e3, but I think both are going to get taken relatively soon. After after knight takes e5, bishop takes b7, rook b8, bishop to d5, or sorry, d5. So this piece can't get in, or this rook can't take a b2, and then bishop takes e3, and then basically it's a very equal position. We were looking at this. I didn't really see many improvements for white along that line. I was looking for something that might give white an opportunity to play, castles or castles queenside, either with knight to d2 or bishop to b3, knight to d2, castles queenside. Could be an idea. But I think at the end of the day, it's white's king safety problems are pretty difficult to get past. Anyways, let's go back to the game. The game has a lot of tactics, and I would highly recommend tactical play to you, Subban. Here, basically, black has this tactic worked out well for black here. Queen g4 and bishop takes e3, and you lose the queen. I'm not sure how competitive the game was after this. This gets a lot closer. In fact, it gets to rook and pawn versus rook, or rook, pawn, and knight versus rook. And then ultimately black wins. But I would like to take a look at this endgame actually. This could be a pretty interesting endgame position. Basically you've done a pretty impressive thing, which is actually you won back all of your material after losing your queen. This is, difficult to do. So right around, I'd say here or so. Yeah, so this is the high point for white after knight to f6. G6 is the best move, but the best response for black is rook to e3, with the idea of playing king e4 and then rook back to e8. In order to defend against this G6 pawn. Rook e3, king d4, rook e8 is what I was looking at. Rook e6 also looks playable. Rook f7. Right, and then at any point here, with the king placed on d4, at any point the knight can, capture, or basically check the pawn and king by moving to e6. I just want to play through this. Yeah. But let's take a look where it gets the very closest, because, I think you did a great job coming back into this game. But I still think that there were better ways for white to play here. So here, you're basically fine with the knight taking the rook on h7. If the knight takes the rook on h7, then you're going to queen the pawn. So that would be good. King f5 allows rook to f3. And rook to f3, because it can be done with check, is a problem, because then rook f3, king g4, knight takes, pawn takes, rook h8 is now, or rook f8 is now possible, defending the h8 square. I guess what I would say here is, there's some very interesting tactics, and we don't get enough kind of endgame play on here. So, I think the main focus in terms of this tactical endgame is looking at why exactly king f5 is a blunder, and why king f4 might be better. So the issue is, if you just so the knight has forked the king and the rook. That's actually fine. This pawn, or this king, is fine with the knight taking the rook on h7, because this rook on b3 has no ability to get to defend the h8 square, which would then become necessary. So here, king f4, and white, I think, is fairly solid. King f5 though allows for this tactic: pawn takes, rook here, and then the rook to f8 as a defensive move. So what can you do to sort of avoid this? G6, king f4. So what happens on king f4? Here, the best play is to not play knight takes h2, because then the pawn gets through, but instead to play something like rook to b2, or anything really, that doesn't allow the pawn to queen. Rook d6, rook d3, I think makes the most intuitive sense, but I'm curious to see what the tactical refutation of that is. This is a very important position, so let's slow it down. There's a few different options for white here. Some are good, some are not good. King f5, or any move of the king to the 5th rank, either e5 or f5, is going to lead to the king getting checked by the rook, or basically the knight taking the rook, the pawn taking the knight, and then the rook coming in to check on either e3 or f3, and then on the following move moving to the 8th rank to defend the h8 square. So that's the first option. Now where's the king go instead? King f4. Okay. Now this is complicated. The knight can't take the rook immediately, so that white's sort of proven the value of this, of the sacrifice of the rook. So here, I don't know. Do you play king c8 and try to get the king all the way over to the defensive squares? Basically, you're fine as black sacrificing the knight for the pawn, for sure. You're maybe fine also sacrificing the rook for the pawn, even. This pawn on g6 is definitely something that black has to deal with, but he can give a lot of material to do it. I'm wondering about a5, or whether there's a way that that moving these pawns forward here, helps black's defense. King c8 is an idea. Rook f7 is an idea. King c8 is an idea. Rook b5. Let's look at this rook b5 line. Or actually, let's look at the king c8 line. I want to see the drawing line for black here, because it looks like this pawn is very advanced. Here, g7, knight d5, king g4, rook b4. No, this looks good for white too. So yeah, so I'm really looking for a move that that draws for black. Black may just be lost here, to be honest. I'm looking and seeing if there's any opportunities. Knight to b5. I think the engine's gonna just reevaluate that close. I think this 0.16 is actually way more than that. I don't know if black has the tactical ability to hold off this pawn from queening, so it seems like every line that we go down on a king f4 turns into a win for white. So interesting. I mean, basically, white got great play, advancing on the king side here in a situation where he was down a queen. I would figure that the game was practically over after the queen got hung, but But yeah, but white stuck with it, and ultimately with this kingside pawn advances, really created a very dangerous situation for black. Black misstepped, or white then misstepped and played king f5, but on king f4, I think white's won, which is actually very impressive given that given that where this game was. So white was actually showing a win here on king f4, and that's pretty impressive. Not gonna pretty impressive just in general. Quite a comeback. On to the next game. We have Amet, Anch, and Piano Man. Let's take a look at these. Thank you very much for sending the game, and please keep sending them in. It's very interesting. Very interesting tactics. Exciting game with a big comeback. That's always good. Let's take a look at Anch's game. Or sorry, no, Amet's game. Amet's game is first. Cool. Awesome. So, all right. Bishop c4 is sort of an interesting opening. I'm not a big fan of bishop c4 in the Sicilian. I think bishop c4, one of the main positional issues that happens with bishop c4 is that it runs into e6. Bishop c4 becomes a much more playable move in general after e5 has been played. If e5 has been played, white is in a good place. If the bishop instead plays e6, or bishop plays c4, while e6 is still available, e6 will clog that diagonal, and then it won't really make much sense to have the bishop facing off against e6. Sometimes there are some opportunities in the Sicilian Grand Prix where you can have the bishop on c4 and then play f5 in order to reopen the threats on f7. With f4, f5, you're getting pressure on f7. So those are the lines that I think of as as bishop c4 being playable. The lines, so basically, as a general rule, moving bishop c4 in the Sicilian is okay. After e5 has been played, so if c5, e5 structure, then bishop to c4. It's also good if bishop c4 can also be good in the Sicilian Grand Prix where f5 is an attacking resource, reopening that a2 to a g8 diagonal. Thank you very much for the follow, Brian. I really appreciate it, and thank you very much for joining the stream. So bishop c4, I guess I would say in general, I would steer you away from. Black sent this game, so let's take it from Black's perspective. d6 makes sense. E6 now, and we're sort of showing, right? I mean, this bishop has no mobility now, and that's sort of a that's a pretty big problem for that bishop on c4. I would play knight a5 as black here. I think with knight a5 you trade off material. I don't know. Maybe the queen b3 sort of refutes knight a5. What happens here? Knight a5, bishop b5, bishop d7, bishop takes, queen takes. I still view this as good for black. You didn't get the knight or you didn't get the white squared bishop for the knight. You got it for the dark squared bishop. But I have no problem with this continuation for black. This looks fine. So anyways, knight a5 was my idea. Standard developing moves I'm sure will not hurt you here as black. Bishop e7, knight f6, those types of things are going to be pretty solid. g6 is fine. You can fianchetto the bishop on g7. And, just straightforward development for black. Black has somewhat of a center disadvantage. White's pawns are on the 4th rank, or white's pawn, e4 pawn is on the 4th rank, and black's pawns are on the 6th rank. White's bishop is sort of, limited in terms of mobility. With a6, you can then shut down this bishop basically entirely. A6, b5 looks pretty brutal for white. Probably a6, a4, but this is very annoying for white to play. Black, the eval's shifting towards black here for sure. In terms of this, castles, a6. I think basically black is just fine. Hey, welcome FIFA boy. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But basically this is sort of somewhere near equality, and should be a playable game with the normal strategies and tactics. It's a game basically. You've exited the opening theory. So what should black do here? Uh, a lot of chess comes down to the fact of like, what are the plans, what are the strongest points and weakest points, and how can you best advance your position. Here, where development's almost finished, black has somewhat of a center disadvantage. What are like the good ideas for black to play? I sort of like a6 with the idea of starting something on the queen side. That's probably not the preferred strategy. Like I'm thinking like a6, a6, knight a5, trade off this right squared white bishop for your knight. That seems pretty intuitive. Things like queen c7, things like bishop d7, but basically forming a plan along the queen side as black makes sense here. I don't really think there's many vulnerabilities for white or for black on the king side. I think basically this structure here is holding up pretty well. I don't see a way that white can easily get into that or easily create problems. So I think in terms of a general plan, looking at this position, the weak point in my eyes is probably this bishop on c4. The weak point for black is not super clear. Probably it's just a collected, a collected concept of this center being slightly better for white and offering white opportunities for expansion. With knight d2, d4, pawn takes d4, or d4 and then knight takes d4 after, so pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. This center should end up being fairly good for white. But I'm thinking that black's chances are going to involve attacking along the queen side. A6 and b5 coming. This looks like a complete strategy to me. Here, like queen d1. Actually, and by the way, this happened in the game. D4 was what was played. Here, knight a5 looks great. That looks like it causes a pretty serious problem for black. So like, knight a5. Queen a5 is not possible. Queen a4 is not possible. Queen c2 will be met with knight takes c4. But knight a5 I think is the best move for white in this case. This is what happened in the game. Instead, I think white's best option is probably to play queen c2 immediately, in which case you can play bishop b5, bishop b3, and overall I think black's looking good. There's this attack should be a stand together hold it together plan for black. Ideas like a5, a4, b5, or b5 going to b4, and just general pressure and expansion being exerted along the queen side seems to be like a good strategy here. You might have to watch out for ideas like d4 in the center, but you can usually meet that with c4. I think overall, black's got the initiative, and it's going to involve a well-structured attack on the queen side. Let's sort of, I'm kind of curious if we can just go with engine lines here, like queen b6, queen e2, a5, a4 or something, b4. This was efficient defense by white, but bn d2. All right, so maybe that was a little bit premature. This is still the correct attack. Let's see tactically, bishop to d7 first, queen to e3, rook to b8, and basically a much more well-supported kingside attack. Here, like a5, a4, b4. I'm just generally liking black's position here. This looks solid, and you have a well-made plan. White's not really going to be able to come up with any way to break into the king side, I don't think. So you can just sort of continue on with your plan. This general expansion looks good for black. Instead, what was played was d4. D4 runs into this basically win of a piece with knight a5, pretty brutal for white. So this was a tactical opportunity for black. Black instead played b5, which makes sense. It's not as good as winning the piece, but it's it's the right idea in that you're expanding on the queen side. Pawn takes, and here I feel like d takes e5. So d takes e5. D takes e5, d takes e5, queen to d5 saves the knight. Because the issue here is white has this counterattack going with this pin on this knight and this bishop attacking on d8. But if you can play queen d5 with tempo and give and basically with queen d5 you're attacking this undefended white queen. The white queen's going to have to spend time moving, and also you've broken this pin. So this is the best tactical continuation for black. Instead, black plays knight a5, and here, basically you've given, you had the opportunity to bail out of losing that piece with pawn takes, queen d5. Anything else is going to lose that piece for you. So that was the correct tactical continuation. With knight a5, you still have to deal with this threat on f6 and this pin from the bishop on g5 to d8. So black, I think, is fine. I think overall this looks pretty good. Knight takes g4 is a mistake. I think after this. Or I guess queen to d4 is the mistake. The knight can still be salvaged with knight takes e6, but here this knight just basically hangs for black. Bishop b7 looks pretty brutal. Bishop b7 appears to threaten mate and the queen at the same time, so that's what I would play. That looks like a pretty solid tactic. So yeah, a very tactically complicated position. White shouldn't have hung that knight, and you threaten the queen and the mate and get the mating square. So overall, really interesting game. Like many, it comes down to really good tactical execution. We can go over and look at the accuracy, but I think there's going to be some big tactical improvements here. But overall, I think black had some good tactics, especially the closing one. Bishop b7 nailed it. Basically queen a8 is threatened and g2 is threatened, and you got the mate off of that. So in terms of hey, thank you very much for sending that game, Brian. Would you be all right with game at 10 a.m. Eastern on May 15th? So that's like not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow in the morning. I could also do it in the afternoon or whatever time really works for you. But yeah, no, I'll add it. It's added to my list. I can. It's added for May 15th at 10 a.m. unless you tell me otherwise. Yeah, and always, Brian, feel free to watch video on demand. Video on demand, everything's up for 2 weeks on Twitch and then forever on YouTube. So now, feel free to send games and I'll just get to them in my analysis, and you can watch them on video on demand. But yeah, I've added for May 15th on 10 a.m. Eastern. So yeah, so for then. Cool. Yeah, thank you very much for sending it, Brian. It's super helpful for you to send games, and yeah, no, I'm happy to take a look at it. Thanks for sending it. But yeah, so the main tactical things here are pawn takes c4, and then you had a tactical save with pawn takes d5, queen d5, fixing the pin and the ability to move the knight away at the same time. That's big. This continuation loses a piece, and then you come up with the game-winning tactic, bishop to b7, and this queen goes to a7, and queen takes g2, and white is dead. So that's good. Good game. Thank you very much for sending it. And yeah, queen takes g2. White's losing. Nicely done. So I wanted to go on to the next, basically the next couple games here. We have one from Anch and we have one from Piano Man. We're going to take a look at both. And let's get to it. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game. Thank you very much for sending the game, Ahmet. Please keep sending them. I think I see your tactics improving, and I think you're really on the right track. With queen b7, you're pretty, with bishop b7, you're making a definitely puzzle rush quality tactic, and it won the game for you. So nicely done, and yeah, keep at it and keep sending more. Very happy to see him. Okay, cool. So Anch sent this one. It was another one between Anch and Mikey. Mikey plays d4. London system, awesome. I strongly recommend the London system, and bishop f5 makes sense too. Very good opening play. It's just hard to beat these openings. They're objectively determined to be the best ones by the computer, and the computer's the best at chess. So London opening, I think, is a great idea. This structure is solid for black or for white. Black can match this structure with c6, but basically no vulnerabilities there. Black's looking good with development. And then, yeah, knight c6 is interesting. Probably is playable. Here your d5 pawn isn't under attack, and I'm always slow to play knight c6, but this is probably an appropriate situation to play knight c6. It's development. I always play c6, knight d7, but knight c6 is fine here for sure. Here, bishop to e5, interesting. I think we looked at this a while ago. It was kind of an interesting thing. Bishop takes, knight takes, pawn takes. An interesting continuation. Knight h4, I think, is the best. I think knight h4 taking this bishop off. And also another thing, which is, this knight takes f4, pawn takes f5, or knight takes f5, pawn takes f5 trade of the knight for the bishop is favorable for black, or favorable for white. So black would want to move his bishop here so that it doesn't get taken by the e pawn. It instead gets taken by like the h pawn. So here, like bishop to g6, I think is actually a sufficiently good move. Anyways, bishop e5, castles, queen f6. I think black's looking pretty reasonable here. White's looking fine. Black's looking good at this point. H5, okay. And here, I think, I think black should defend this pawn with something. Bishop g6 is kind of tricky. Bishop g6 runs into g4. I'm not sure how good that is. Queen h6 is interesting, but I think basically either queen h6 or bishop g6, and black should be in better shape. If black just sort of ignores that and plays b5, queen takes h5. I think that's going to lead to a lead for white. So definitely keep an eye on this pawn. It's hard determining when it's worth defending it or when it's not worth defending it, but I think here, spending a move on queen h6 doesn't really hurt too much. I mean, you're well supported for the push on e5 anyways. Letting the queen basically letting the queen, take a pawn with a very serious attack is a dangerous thing for black to allow. So I think maybe queen h6, or even, I wonder, g6. G6 probably runs into f3, g4, and that's a problem. I go with queen h6. That's just fine. Yep, here I think black is winning. But white got the h5 pawn. This queenside attack for black, I think, is fundamentally good. I like this idea for black. I like the idea, and I like what black is doing here. I think saving this h5 pawn was important. Queen h6, basically playing a defensive move, queen h6, and then playing b5, b4, I like a lot as a plan. The queenside expansion and the queenside expansion here, I think, really is strategically correct. I think this is a good idea, and I think you're gonna do a good job, kind of securing best chances with things like b5, b4. This was interesting. Yeah, so e5 is e4 is a tactical error here. Not a super easy one to see, but on e4, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, forking the king and knight. So that is, that's a tactic. Good for Mikey for seeing it. Good tactic, good win of the piece. But white should definitely play bishop takes c6 here. With bishop takes c6, you are potentially opening yourself up to pawn takes c3, but black's going to have to fix the rook. So taking bishop takes c6 with another attack to win even more material is the move. overall, I like the position. I think black, basically, black navigated this pretty well. So let's go back and take a look at the key parts of this game. In this game, basically I thought the opening was very well played. These kind of London games are correct, strong ideas. Knight c6 is interesting. Bishop e5 is interesting. Probably not the best. I think maybe bishop e5 sort of overextends the bishop. I remember there were a few lines we looked at where bishop to e5 was a good tactical play, but I think at the end of the day, just if you go through and you trade everything off, like knight takes, pawn takes, this is not particularly good for white. This pawn structure is more attackable than this triangle pawn structure. The triangle pawn structure is very good, very solid, but this this is a little bit more flimsy, I think. So I guess here I would play as white. I would probably just let black take your bad bishop with his good bishop. Develop around it. Something like bishop e2 is probably good. Rook c1 is what the engine is suggesting. Rook c1, c4, will secure you a semi-open file for the rook. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, basically I think black's, it's an even game. So here, knight c6 is probably fine. Bishop to e5 I think is not the right move. I think you want to just make a developing move and let this bishop take on g3 if he wants to. Bishop takes f6 I think is... I don't think this knight is that important, to be honest. Basically you're playing bishop e5 and you're playing bishop takes f6 to try to take this knight on f6. I just don't think that knight is good enough for black to justify moving your piece twice to take it. I think you can just leave the bishop on g3 and sort of develop around this center structure. That would be my suggestion there. But you trade for that knight on f6, and we're still in a fine competitive position. And then I think black makes an error here in terms of hanging this h5 pawn. I like what black's doing. I like this general concept: b5, b4, attacking on the queen side. I think that's black's route forward. That's black's plan for the rest of this game. But I think hanging this h pawn uncompensated is a little bit too much. It's just it's too opening and it's material that you're losing. So I think that this ends up being giving away a little bit too much material. Here you have a tactical improvement. That queen looks trapped to me, right? Am I right? That queen is stuck. So the knight moves to e4, and if you take it with the pawn, the queen moves to either or you can play g5. The queen can also go to g5, and then you're safe, right? So this queen got stuck on h5, so g4 I think was an error. G4 allows bishop g6, and then the queen gets stuck. On bishop g6, the knight goes here, and if you just play pawn takes e4 here, you're basically the queen has been freed, but you've lost a full knight. I mean, this knight didn't take anything to go to e4. It just moved to e4 to free the queen's square. So g4 I would look at as a tactical move. I think you've made a good idea. I think the plans here are black should attack on the queen side, white should attack on the king side. But g4 I think is just not quite a playable move. In terms of other options, I'm thinking I don't want to move the queen back. I was looking at bishop e2. The engine is suggesting moving the queen back. I don't know if that's kind of a bummer. And then you attack, in the engine plan, queen f3, b takes c3, pawn takes c3, and then g4 queen f3, pawn takes, and then something for black, say bishop to c2. But this does sort of neutralize the attack for white. But it's still better than g4. G4 runs into things getting stuck. This tactically is too trapping. So definitely pay attention to your queen's mobility. That's the biggest takeaway from this. I think everything's pretty much going well for either side. You've both formulated strong conceptual plans. I think you're executing on the right areas to attack. But G4 just runs into a tactical issue. So these types of things happen. You can definitely get your queen trapped in to unusual tactics. Definitely happens. Has happened to me in many times. But yeah, really keep h5 is a great attacking square for the queen because it's facing h7. But at the same time, you have to watch for you be very careful with its escape squares because there's no forward-looking escape squares. It really needs this diagonal. If you keep this diagonal in mind as the queen's necessary escape route, I think you're not gonna play g4. You play like bishop b2 or queen f3 is considered to be the best. But g4 is a tactical error. You definitely need to be careful about the mobility of your queen. On h5 or pretty much always when it's in enemy territory. But queen h5 is definitely one of them. So. This trade, this turned into a tactical trade which left things equal. D takes e4 just basically wins this piece. The queen does get out, but you've won the piece, so you end up a piece. If you go into this continuation, you're basically trading off equally. Both black and white both give up a minor piece and a queen here. So that was improvement for black is taking this knight on e4. Just puts you a piece ahead. I mean, it's best to win the queen if it gets trapped. But if the queen can get out at the expense of a minor piece, you're still winning a minor piece in that situation, and that should be enough to be decisive. So this all makes sense. And then here, king takes h6. This is another tactical situation. E4 just has a tactical refutation, which got seen. So bishop takes, and then here, bishop takes c6 puts white pretty significantly ahead. White castles, pawn takes c3. But basically, black had been up a piece, or black had, black could have been. What happened here? White could have gotten back his piece by playing bishop takes c6, but he didn't. He should have played bishop takes c6 here, and then he would have been up, up some pawns. With bishop takes c6, black has 5 pawns, white has 7, and that 2 pawns is going to really hold up very well. Also, this bishop takes c6 leads to a threat on a8. Sure, black doesn't want to lose an exchange here and be an exchange in pawns down, so strongly recommend changing to bishop takes c6 here. I understand the queenside attack looks dangerous, and I think the queenside attack was a good plan for black, but on bishop takes c6, I mean, bishop takes c6 immediately for white, I think is the best idea. Just because black has to respond to it with something that moves the rook. Castling, I think, can be done later. This is annoying, but not enough to be seriously dangerous. So you might as well just take the hanging piece. You take it next move and basically end up in a similar position. And this looks pretty. This looks pretty good for black at this point. In terms of things to improve here, bishop takes f7 seems too aggressive to me. I see you're trying to generate a tactic, but I think it's just not quite sound. Bishop takes f7 and rook takes f7, and things are. There's just no mating tactic that comes along with rook to g6. If there was, it would be a cool sacrifice. But I think this ends up being, there have been enough tactical things in this game, like bishop takes f7 basically is an idea for a sacrifice, but the sacrifice needs to be fully calculated in order to make a sacrifice that's that large. If for giving up a piece, you pretty much need to be sure you're getting back a piece or getting back a lot of material at least. So I think this is a little bit premature. E4 might be the move. Rook to G3 and then like rook to 8. I mean, maybe if you want to get the rooks in that way. But you can't I don't think you can give up this full bishop here. It's just too much. Anyways, very interesting game. As always, tactics. Definitely pressing the tactics button. Really interesting game. I liked the openings a lot. I thought that was solid. Queen H5. I liked the planning too. I thought both the planning and the openings were really good. You guys both got the correct strategy right. Yay! Yeah, tactics, exactly. That's what I was saying. I didn't want to be the one to post it, but the tactics emote is very relevant here. But yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, you guys both came up with good openings, and you guys both came up with good middle game plans. You saw that white was supposed to attack on the king side, and black was supposed to attack on the queen side. And I think it sort of came down to a tactical. No problem at all. No problem at all, Aphelion. It's the best emote, no doubt about it. But yeah, so here, I just sort of like black's. I like the way that everyone was kind of in this game, but the main decisive point of this game was really the soundness of tactics. With a sufficient tactical study, I think black sees king h6 over e4. With e4, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes. Yeah, we're we'll see what Jen's up to. Yeah, I'm not an artist, but Jen has been so great in being supportive. So we'll see. But anyways, here this ends up being, I think, pretty good for black. But the game was really decided on tactical execution. The plans were good. The openings were good. London system, like, how can you go wrong? And played correctly. But yeah, the difference here, I guess, was really just tactical execution and whether or not you could fully, you could get a full game in. It's just accuracy, as it often is. I mean, many games at club level, a very high percentage are determined on tactics, so tactics are the thing to work on. And you guys seem to be coming along very well on that. I'm always very happy to hear you guys improving and doing well, and raising your ratings on Puzzle Battle and all that stuff. I'm always very happy to hear it, and I really am very happy. I hope I think it's I think those types of things are indications that you're really moving forward. It's really the most efficient way to learn, and I really think it'll help you. So that's where this game was decided. Interesting game, though. I think you got a lot of stuff right. Both the openings and strategy I liked a lot in this one. All right, Piano Man's game. Let's take a look. And taking it from black's perspective. Okay. So that's awesome. You guys, it's great. I really think it's the most efficient way for people at class level to move forward. That's a great job, though, Aphelion. I'm always happy to hear new records being set, new progress, and the longer you do it, and the longer you do it with consistency, I think you're in a great shape. If you just keep pushing forward, you're gonna have great positions and when I think so. I think when you move, basically when you have a 50 in survival, if you do them slow enough, I think you'll have a good chance. But yeah, I think it's a great it's great. It's great. I'm always happy to hear that you guys are doing well with that kind of stuff, and I think it really is where you can improve. But yeah, so knight f3, d5, pawn takes, d4, and here basically I think that I don't know. It looks like a fairly simplified position. This is, I don't know the name of this, exchange variation of a Caro-Kann. Caro-Kann with knight f3 is a little bit unusual. I don't know it super well. You know, I play the mainline Caro-Kann, just e4, d4, and knight c3. Knight f3 is interesting. I don't know this theory super well. So I'm gonna have to refer to the engine, I guess. But overall here, I think white is looking fine. You know, the Caro-Kann exchange variation lets black develop the knight to c6, so that's a big advantage relative to the normal Caro-Kann. Bishop takes a3, I think, is right. Knight takes a3, I think, is not. I think knight to a3 is an error. You know, the thing about doubled isolated rook pawns is that they're worth very little more than a single pawn. You know, doubled isolated rook pawns are about as, you know, as not worth more than a pawn as doubled pawns can be. You know, if they're like this structure here is probably worth 1.2 pawns. So if you can turn this structure, where you would say, okay, these pawns are probably worth about 2 pawns, to this structure, where you say these 2 pawns are probably worth about 1.2 pawns, then white has basically hung almost a pawn in playing knight to a3. You know, basically, you know, if you think about it in an evaluation perspective, just because those rook pawns are so bad, I mean, you know, it's just it's hard to play with them, and basically, you know, they're maybe they can be used as a defensive resource, but they have very little value relative to a single pawn there. And in fact, they don't even hold. In fact, they sort of weaken the pawn on a3 because the rook doesn't even have direct defense on it. So yeah, so knight a3 I think is a blunder, and bishop takes a3 capitalizes on it. You know, even though it's your good squared bishop, I think creating doubled isolated rook pawns is so, you know, doubled isolated rook pawns are almost a loss of a pawn, so it's definitely worth it for you. Castles, and here, yeah, I think black's just fine. Black's got 1.6 pawns. Things are going smoothly. You know, I wouldn't trade these 2 pawns. What's gonna happen here on bishop to c7 is, I think, you're basically trading these 2 pawns for these 2 pawns, and that's not a good trade for black. So I would play knight takes a4 here, or if you prefer, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, knight to c4, and then you get a solid, you know, a posted piece here. But I think knight takes a4 is better. If you just count it out, knight takes a4 gets responded to by rook takes b6, or rook takes b7, and then knight takes c3. So I would just take the you know, take the hanging pawn. You get 2 for 1, even though this a4 pawn isn't worth very much. You still basically get 2 pawns in exchange for your b pawn. So overall, yeah, I think you know, think black's just playing smoothly. I think black probably should play knight takes a4 as opposed to rook. Well, I don't know. Rook fc8 is getting evaluated as fine. I would have played knight takes a4 here, but after this, it's looking like rook fc8 is also fine. If you play knight takes a4, then knight takes a4 is best. If you play rook fc8, then rook fc8 is best. So, you know, whatever works there. So I would say knight takes a4, but rook fc8 is fine, as stated by the engine. I don't see really any problem with rook takes a4. Rook takes a4, bishop b5, I guess, but I don't see anything too terrible about trading off that bishop or that bishop for that knight on c6. If anything, taking your opponent's bishop away is good. And I'll slow down a little bit. I just wanted to see how this sort of plays out. Yeah. Looks like white hangs a rook, right? Rook takes e6 is a surprising move. Interesting. And then I would say here, there's basically a big endgame principle that I think is important. From this point, right? You have king and 3 pawns versus king knight and 3 pawns. When you're in this situation, you have to follow the principle. If you're up material, then trade off pieces. If you're up material, don't trade off pawns. Only trade off pieces. Because you need at least a few pawns to win in the endgame. The issue here is basically you traded off all the pawns. That's what happens in this game. So you should probably go through some efforts as black, not to trade off pawns here. You should do things like play king d5 and then king e5. But hold on to the pawns to the best of your ability here. Like, get your king very involved, and then here, I think the move for sure is e4. With e4, you get this pawn passed, and the knight will be able to handle an extra pawn here. If you have to sack the full knight, I mean, it's probably worth it. But getting this pawn passed on e4 is a big improvement over g6. You should do everything you can if you're up a piece, to hold on to the pawns so you can queen one of the pawns. So that was a big takeaway here. So going through this game front to back, the improvements that I would look at, this Caro-Kann is sort of interesting. Good move. Bishop takes a3 provides great opportunities for black. You both develop. And here I would play knight takes a4 and get the kind of trading of these pawns on the queen side started. Yeah, I think from here you should pretty much be good. I mean, you're winning all the center pawns, but you have to be careful. So knight takes e5 knight takes d5 is a great tactic for white. Can see how that could get missed for sure. So a little bit of tactical improvement there. Playing rook to b4 allows knight takes b5, and that causes problems for black. Yeah, overall, at this point, you should be very close to being won as black. If you play e4, I think you are won as black. And so I would recommend playing e4, and then if you play e4, you should be able to advance that pawn. Looks strong, looks solid, and I think you'll win. So it come down to a few principles. As always, tactical study. But secondary to that, I thought your bishop takes a3 and doubling the pawns on the rook file was a good idea. And the kind of most decisive in this game is in this position, which I think is the sort of decisive position of this game. If you play e4, you are very likely to win this game. You don't want to trade off pawns. If you trade off pawns, you're still pretty likely to win this game. But I think it's really just important from a fundamental perspective to understand that, if you're up a piece, leave the pawns on, because you need a pawn to trade, to promote to a queen. If you're down a piece, then try to trade pawns off. But if you're up a piece, trade off the pieces, but don't trade off the pawns. You need the pawns. So that's my advice on that one. I think that with that piece of advice, e4 becomes a much more clear move to make. And with e4, you will be able to handle, you will ultimately be able to handle the advancement of these kingside pawns with your knight. It may look a little bit scary, but I promise it's not going to be that difficult. If you ever have to sack the knight even, you'll be fine. But without the king being involved, because the king will be involved in the defense of the e4 pawn, you're going to don't worry about it. So pawn take to e4, decisive black. These are not going to go themselves and get knight in there defending. This king can never really defend these pawns very effectively because the king is stuck, dealing with this passed pawn for black. Overall, very interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it. Please keep sending them. Really appreciate it, Piano Man. And yeah, feel free. Keep sending in the games. They're interesting, and hope the analysis is helpful. I learn a lot, so I hope you guys get something out of it too. My next stream is at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. Yeah, hope to see you guys there. Thanks all for sending the games. Thanks all for contributing the material for the stream. And have a good one, guys. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.